Choosing the right cabinet hinges for your project should not be complicated. However, due to manuals and the endless amount of options out there, it makes it very confusing. Selecting the right hardware for your cabinetry project will make your project go incredibly smooth. Today, I'm going to provide a simple step-by-step breakdown that removes all of that confusion. If you were to ask me, I would say that the simplest project for a woodworker and the most basic project that you can make is a cabinet. It is literally a box that usually has a box inside of it and has some sort of rectangular shaped flat panel that acts as either a door covering that box or a drawer front covering the box, which is your drawer. So when you really think about it, it's a very simple task. I have seen some amazing woodworkers who, if you were to ask them to build a cabinet, they would struggle, they would get very frustrated, and they would think that it's way more complicated than it really is. The problem is not the project, the problem is the hardware. Now, when you open up one of the manuals from any of the leading manufacturers, it can be incredibly overwhelming and incredibly confusing. But here's what I'm going to tell you about those catalogs. 80% of the stuff in those catalogs is for very specific applications that most people, especially beginners, are never going to need. The other 20% is exactly what you need and is exactly what's going to get you through your project. From there, you just have to figure out what of that 20% you actually need. Let's start by talking about the three different styles of cabinets. We have face frame, we have frameless, and we have inset. What you can see here, this is a frameless inset application. This is a face frame inset application. This is a face frame overlay, frameless overlay, face frame overlay, face frame overlay, face frame overlay, and frameless overlay. Overlay refers to how much the door protrudes over the internal edge of the face frame. Frameless overlay refers to how much the door protrudes over the wall of the cabinet. So in this case, this is the side wall, this is the door. The overlay is the distance from the inside edge of that cabinet to the outside edge of the door. Then when we take an example like inset, in this case being face frame inset, it means that the door is in perfect alignment with either the face frame or, in this case, side-by-side cabinets being frameless. This is frameless inset. The type of cabinet that you're building 100% dictates the type of hinge that you need to use for your project. So now you're probably thinking, great, Jason, I understand the basic styles of cabinets. Now, how do I determine which ones I need? Well, that's what I'm about to show you now. Now, if you were to open up a catalog, you are going to see a whole bunch of different letters and abbreviations depending on the catalog from the brand that you're choosing. Everything that I'm going to talk about for the most part in this video is Salice. Why? Because I primarily use Salice, and Salice just quite honestly makes it a lot easier to do what I'm about to show you. And the reason for that is because of standardization. While there are many different acronyms inside of that manual, there's really only a few that you need to truly worry yourself about, because again, 20% of everything in that manual is for the basic average woodworker. The other 80% is for crazy stuff that you may never even do. Now, there are 4 abbreviations and or letters that I really want to highlight that are going to help you. The first thing I want to talk about is the overlay, which we already discussed. It's the amount that the door protrudes off the inside of the face frame or the inside of the cabinet side. The next thing I want to talk about is the tab value. With Salice's manual specifically, the tab value is identified with the letter K. But what the tab value is the distance from the edge of the door to the edge of the hole that you bore for the hinge. Now, typically the tab is going to be probably between 2 and 6, with 4 and 5 being the most common. However, the tab can be adjusted based on other factors, which we will talk about. The next thing, and probably the most important that we want to know, is what the constant value is. Every hinge has a constant value. This is going to make sense once I get into this equation that I'm going to show you. These numbers are provided by the manufacturer and typically can be found within a manual and can also be referred to as either overlay value or required door overlay. And finally, I want to talk about plate height. In Salice's example, they use the letter H in their catalogs, but this can range anywhere from 0 millimeters all the way up to 30 millimeters. Now, for the sake of simplicity, in this video, everything I talk about is going to be in metric measurements. Why? Because it's going to be a lot easier to understand. I will put on screen right here. This is also in the Salice catalogs. I'm sure it's probably in other catalogs as well, but there is an equivalent for all of the different sizes that I'm going to talk about, especially when it comes to plate height. If you want to make that modification, so be it. When it comes to cabinet hardware, there is a reason why all of the major manufacturers use primarily metric for all of their measurements and use imperial as a secondary. So in this scenario, we have OL being the abbreviation for overlay. We have K being the abbreviation for tab. We have C being the abbreviation for constant value. And we have H identifying the plate height. The first formula, if you want to determine your overlay, then you would take overlay OL equals K being the tab, plus C being the constant, minus H being the plate height. The other option is you can determine your plate height using this instead of determining your overlay. That would be H for your plate height equals K being your tab value, plus C being your constant value, minus your OL, which is overlay. Of these two, I prefer the second over the first, mainly because I would rather figure out what my plate height is because I already know what I want my overlay to be. By selecting the proper plate, that will get me wherever I need to be. Either way will work, and I'm going to give you a real-world example of how it works. This is a true full overlay frameless cabinet. This is the door, this is the side. As you can see, it is all flush. This is 19 millimeter thick material, and I have a 19 millimeter overlay. Now let's take a look at the math. If you're building frameless cabinetry and you want soft close European style hinges, this setup right here is perfect. You don't need anything else fancy. Going back to the math that I talked about, so here we have 15 plus 4 minus 0 equals 19 millimeters of overlay. So let's dive into that a little bit more. We know that the constant is 15. That's this number right here. This particular straight arm European style hinge from Salice has a constant of 15 with all of them, okay? Now we want to do a 4 millimeter tab, okay? So that's 15 plus the 4 equals 19. We want to subtract the plate height. In this case, we used a 0 millimeter plate. So 15 plus 4 equals 19. That's going to give me a true full overlay. But now let's do some examples of changing it up. If we did a 5 millimeter tab, our overlay would now be 20 millimeters. If we did a 4 millimeter tab and we used a 2 millimeter plate, again, I'm not changing the hinge. I'm just modifying where it's being drilled or what plate I am using. It makes a difference on what your overlay is going to be. So we have 15 plus 4. Now we're going to subtract 2. That will give us a 17 millimeter overlay. I hope now this is starting to make a little bit more sense. So you can see by simply adjusting these numbers, you can manipulate the overlay that you want, which will then give you a different reveal. So what are some other factors that go into the right hinge selection? We talked about overlay, but we also made a comment about the term reveal. This is something that I think a lot of people get confused by as well because they don't truly understand what reveal means. Reveal is the distance, in this case, since this is an inset face frame, the reveal is the distance from the door to the face frame. You can see that the reveal on this door is much tighter than the reveal on this door. Same thing applies over here with the frameless application, or here where we have two doors back to back and they are overlay on a face frame application, so two doors that open inward. As such, the reveal is the distance from this door to this door. On this frameless single door full overlay that I just showed you and talked about how this is a true full overlay door, this is a 19 millimeter overlay and it is perfectly flush, meaning there is no reveal. So we know that reveal is something you need to pay attention to. We know that the style, whether it's frameless, whether it's face frame, or whether it's inset. The next topic that can determine what you're using is the door thickness. Now you'll notice that this side and this door are substantially thicker than what you see in this demonstration here. Now, for the most part, I would say 90% of people are always going to be in a scenario where they're going to be using 3/4 inch or 18 to 19 millimeter material. However, the thickness of your door can have an impact on what hinges you choose, and that has to do with the clearance required when you open that door. The next consideration is the plate itself. As you can see here, there are a multitude of different plate options. Anywhere in this scenario, again, these are probably going to be some of your more common, whether you're doing frameless or you're doing face frame. These are going to be pretty much specific to a face frame application. And these right here can be used in either application in most cases, and they're just going to provide a little bit more of a clean look. But the big thing that I want to point out is the difference in thickness. So we have a 2 or a 0 millimeter, a 2, a 3, a 6, a 9, and a 12. The reason why you see so many more of these is because they're so much more universal in their applications, right? Whether you're doing face frame, whether you're doing inset, whether you're doing frameless, you're going to have a lot more options, which is why you see a 0, a 2, a 3, a 6, a 9, a 12, an 18, all the way up to 30. And you saw in the example how adjusting the height of your plate and or the tab can have an effect on the desired overlay and also your end reveal. And finally, there are various types of hinges, whether it's a push to open, whether it's a clip-on, whether it's a compact, etc. And to give you some examples, this is just a standard straight arm hinge, very commonly used. This would be the hinge that you want to use in a full overlay frameless cabinet. The next you'll see, this is used for a frameless inset, and you'll notice it is very different here. It is not a perfectly straight arm like this. This is commonly referred to as cranked, and they have various different styles for different applications. This would typically be the application or the type of hinge that you're going to use for this application. And then finally over here we have a more compact version of the hinges. Still operate very similar. They still adjust very similar. It's just a much smaller hinge itself. And there are different versions of this hinge to accommodate for different overlays. Since I showed you those, I can show you in the manual. It doesn't have to be incredibly confusing. It can actually be incredibly helpful as well. So just to give you a little bit better visual, we have our full overlay straight arm hinge. You can see right here what kind of overlay it's going to give me. Again, now we have all these letters, which if you go back to the abbreviations right here, you can figure out what all of those mean. I'll talk more about that here in just a moment. Then we get into our different overlays. So we have 1/2 inch overlay, half overlay, and inset. And you can tell that that angle on that hinge gets more aggressive with each one. And you can look down here in the pictures and see exactly what kind of overlay it's going to provide. Since we're already looking at the manual, I figured this would be a really good opportunity to kind of help you understand these manuals better. When I first looked at these manuals, it was incredibly confusing to me because there are so many letters and numbers that I didn't understand. If you understand what the letters, the values, the numbers, and everything mean, using a manual is the absolute surefire way to select the proper equipment. Now, not every company has an incredibly easy manual to follow. This one right here, this is for the Salice hinges, pretty much everything I've been showing you in this video. If you look down here, it has the abbreviations. S, thickness of the side of the cabinet. D, required door overlay. T, door thickness. K, drilling distance. That's that tab that we talked about. I said before how the door thickness can have an effect on what hinges you use. A, the reveal. We talked about that. L, the gap between the door and the cabinet. We didn't discuss that. That is how far the door sits from the cabinet side. Not how far it protrudes, but how far away it sits. With these hinges and other manufacturers, you can actually adjust in and out where you need those to go, but you'll be able to find out what those measurements are. H, height of the mounting plate, like we discussed. G is the hinge constant. Now let me show you in the manual some of these equations. And this could get a little bit confusing, but you just need to understand what each one of these things mean. So before I referred to everything as overlay, and I said OL. If you go into the manual here, it says D, required door overlay. So if I know that I want to have a 17 millimeter overlay on a frameless cabinet, I know this number would be 17. Okay, this is my constant. That's the only number it provides for me. So in this manual from Salice, they provide you the constants for their hinges. This one has a 10. This one has a 6. This one is a -2. The reason why these are different is because they are different hinges for different applications. So all you need to do is look in the manual and find that. If you're using this hinge, you know it's a 15. We're going to add the tab, in this case K, the drilling distance. And we're going to subtract the H, which again is the plate height. So it is in the manual right here for you to determine what you need to know. Then you can come over here and look at some other charts along with various other ones throughout the manual. This is a space needed to open door. What that's referring to is the space needed from not only the end of the door to the side of the cabinet, because there might be another cabinet door there, but also from the back side of the door to the front side of the cabinet. And what this is saying is T equals door thickness, K is the tab. If I did a tab of 5 millimeters, okay, and I had a door thickness of 19, come down here, I need 1.2 millimeters of space at a minimum. So that's all this chart is telling you, okay? So all the information you need is in there. You just have to understand what each one of the values means. Here I can show you a real-time version of what I was talking about earlier, where you can achieve the same results with different mounting hardware and different hinge options. You just have to understand how to calculate for it. Here you can see this hinge paired with this mounting bracket. Exact same results, this hinge with this mounting bracket. It's the math that changes. Once you identify the type of cabinet that you're going to build and you understand that simple formula, this whole process becomes a lot easier. Now, all the major companies within the cabinet hardware industry, they all provide all of their manuals online for you to look at. I encourage all of you to go there and become familiar with it. The more familiar you are with the manual, the easier this process will become. Next, I would encourage you to maybe find a hinge that you like, or a few different hinges that you like in different applications, and make some mock-ups just like this so you always have it around, and make notes on it so you never forget. Just like with anything else, the more you do something, the more familiar you become, therefore the easier it is. This is no different. Going to a big box store and looking at the inexpensive, lower quality options that they offer is definitely not the best solution. If you want access to the calculator that I have, then you can go to my Patreon. It is available there to all of my patrons. So if you found this video helpful, consider becoming a patron. You can go to patreon.com/Spence Woodworking. I'll leave a link down in the video description, but you can access that calculator, which will make this a million times easier, but you can also get exclusive content every week. My hope is that you're now going to walk away from this video with a little bit better understanding of hinges. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments. Bye.